next we have the Santa Fe Watershed Association. So Mori Hensley is the Director of Planning, Education, and Restoration for the Santa Fe Watershed Association, where she's currently leading the launch of their newest initiative, the Santa Fe Community Network. And I think that's, leading that launch right now as we speak, right? Like you're out in the field. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. Thanks, JR. Thanks for having me be part of this. Can you all hear me? Is my service okay?
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I am in my car, so hopefully it's a little less windy, but yep, we're out. I'm blessed to be in the parking lot of Reunity Resources right now across the street from San Ysidro Park, where we're helping Santa Fe County do their Earth Day launch. So we've had a great turnout, and we're planting riparian trees, shrubs, and wildflowers. So it's a good way to be continuing the Earth Day, Earth Week celebration. So, but happy to join you all. So I don't have any slides, but I figured I would just kind of give a little bit of an overview of some of the things that we do at the Watershed Association, and maybe start with explaining what a watershed is for those of us who might not have heard the word since 5th grade or something like that. So basically, in the simplest terms, it's basically just surface water flow that all leads to a single point. So that's usually around a river or an arroyo or things like that. So our kind of artery of the Santa Fe watershed is obviously the Santa Fe River. And it's about 285 square miles. The river itself is 46 miles, so not super big, but very important, as we all know. We're also, watersheds are nested, so we're also in the Rio Grande watershed. And I think that it's nice to frame a lot of thoughts about land through the lens of watersheds, just because it really reminds us how we are all connected, and we are all downstream of somebody, we're all upstream of somebody, we're all kind of part of the water cycle. And that really connects us. And so when we're thinking about a land ethic or a water ethic kind of in our actions, I think we can really frame it, or we can help frame it by thinking about watersheds and how we engage with the water cycle, or how our relationship with the land is related to how water flows. Of course, groundwater is a whole related but other issue. So that's kind of the watershed. We obviously advocate or work somewhat in all of the watershed, but the majority of our work is focused within sort of the Metro Santa Fe area, and that's where our office is. The Santa Fe watershed itself is, of course, in the homelands of primarily Tewa-speaking Pueblo people, but also Kiris and the Jicria Apache. We work most closely with Cochiti Pueblo, but also Nambe, Tesuque, and Kewa are important Pueblos that have very important ties to this watershed. In terms of the Santa Fe Watershed Association, we've been around since 1997, and I think it was founded by a local hydrologist who was concerned about gravel mining in kind of the Agua Fria area. So definitely a lot of the core of what we have done for decades now is trying to work towards a more ecologically, hydrologically functional watershed and river, even if that doesn't mean going back to some historical version of what the river or what the watershed looked like, because we have modified it so intensely, especially in the last 50 or 100 years. But also, as the climate has changed, as geology has changed, we're trying to kind of find some sort of function, even if it is more forward-looking, rather than kind of trying to restore to a historical kind of benchmark, because of course there are so many that that we could choose from, but none of the parameters are now kind of different. So we kind of focus our actions and 4 pillars, I guess you could say. We do stewardship is our main one, restoration, advocacy, and education. And so we have a wide range of programs that happen kind of. I always overthink everything. So the 4 pillars to me are incredibly related. So I can never decide which pillar each program falls under. But in any case, we really try to reach out to folks who live in the watershed of all different ages and backgrounds and geographies within the watershed. So most people in Santa Fe, when they hear the Santa Fe watershed, we tend to think the upper municipal watershed that's closed to the public, kind of in the mountains, where we have 2 reservoirs, and in a wet year we can get as much as 50% of the city's drinking water from the Santa Fe watershed and from the Santa Fe River. So, of course, in the upper watershed, there are a lot of questions about forest management and preventing catastrophic forest fires and water quality and those types of conversations. And of course, within sort of the middle watershed, which we think of as mostly the city of Santa Fe, we have more issues of stormwater and all kinds of pollution happening, and heat islands, things like that. And then, of course, in the lower watershed, where we have the villages of La Cienega, La Cieneguilla, La Bajada, and finally Cochiti Pueblo, where were it not for Cochiti Dam, the Santa Fe River would flow into the Rio Grande at Cochiti Pueblo. So we have all of these. And so down there, of course, there's more agricultural history and culture. So very different water uses and relationships to water than in the city or in the upper watershed. And I think that we as an organization really see ourselves as a bridge and as a connecting collaborative force or catalyst for different folks with different interests to be able to be heard and to have a seat at the table in terms of management decisions and things like that. So we ourselves, I guess, more than even wanting to have a seat at the table, we see ourselves as making sure there is a table and making sure that there are enough chairs and the table is set for enough people. So that's kind of how we see what we do. We work, I guess, going through our programs a little bit, our educational programs. We kind of have 2 main programs right now that we focus on. We have the My Water, My Watershed program, where our goal is to take every 5th grade student in Santa Fe on a field trip to the upper watershed so they can learn about where their water comes from and kind of how water flows through our watershed in different ways that that people of all ages can get involved in being stewards of this landscape and conserving water and things like that. And right now we're probably at about 80% there. So that's pretty good. We also have, different talks and things. And we also have a seminar called Climate Masters that we try to put on every year or 2, where it's mostly catered to adults and how water and climate are connected, and sort of actions that we as individuals and as a collective can take to sort of take climate action and the impacts of climate change within our watershed and within our city and things like that. So our main advocacy project that is ongoing has been the Living River Ordinance. So I grew up in Santa Fe, and I know that while I was growing up, the river hardly ever flowed. But I think it was 2012, the Living River Ordinance was passed, and that basically allowed for a small amount of water to be released down the river when we're not in extreme drought years. But I think from the Watershed Association's perspective, it's important to have some water in the river. And of course, there are a lot of species, plant and animal species, that rely on the river. And also in terms of making it a more habitable place for human beings to recreate and spend time and feel a connection to the river, is also something that's really important to us to sort of foster a sense of community and stewardship and responsibility between all people who live on this land, with the land and with the water, that we really understand viscerally how precious water is in this landscape, and all of the ways that, and all of the scales on which we can help take care of it and help make sure that we all have access to clean water for our our lives. So the other advocacy piece, which I'll put under the advocacy category, is sort of an ongoing conversation that we're part of called the Santa Fe River Traditional Communities Collaborative, where we help facilitate and organize meetings between all of what we call the downstream communities, basically everyone downstream of the city of Santa Fe. So Cochiti and La Bajada and La Cienega, La Cieneguilla, and Agua Fria, to be able to have an avenue for them to communicate with city and county water managers, to make sure that their voices and their concerns are being heard. So that's something we contribute to, and that's very important to us. Then in terms of stewardship, this is kind of our most visible way that we engage with the community. If you've walked down the river in the city of Santa Fe, you've probably seen some blue signs. And in fact, we're very lucky to have the co-op as one of those sponsors with their own sign along the river. And that's called our Adopt the River program. And we also have a parallel Adopt an Arroyo program where we have steward teams that go out and clean up trash and also do other types of projects, in the future, we'll be doing more monitoring, but also some erosion control projects and things like that. But unfortunately, garbage in our waterways, we all know, is kind of this infinitely vast issue all across America, but especially in New Mexico, and in our watershed. And so we're extremely grateful to all of our volunteers who are now kind of getting back out into their reaches after a year of COVID and us kind of trying to adjust, and folks are finally able to get back out into their reaches and clean up the trash. And so things will start looking better, and we're really grateful for that. And we hope that one day we won't have to do that because there won't be as much litter. But obviously, that's a whole systemic, there's a lot of systemic things that are going to keep causing litter to happen that we cannot solve ourselves. But at the very least, we can help clean up some of the mess and raise some awareness and get folks out and feeling connected to these waterways that only sometimes have water in them. And then, the last piece we call is restoration. And historically, we've done some erosion control projects, and we are really on a rain garden bender right now, where we are really trying to plant as many rain gardens as we possibly, or build as many rain gardens as we possibly can throughout the city, especially for those of you who may not be aware of what a rain garden is. They're also called bioretention basins, and they can kind of be all shapes and sizes, but the intention of a rain garden is to divert stormwater and infiltrate it back into the groundwater instead of letting stormwater run off and cause all kinds of problems. So basically, the more we pave over, especially the city, at the more sidewalks and roads and rooftops and parking lots and even compacted soil that we have, basically whenever it rains, water has nowhere to go except sideways instead of down into the soil. So water flows off of all of these impermeable surfaces, and it collects into our roadways and into our storm drains. Our storm drains then flow into our arroyos, into our river. And as we saw from the flash flood in 2018, that can be extremely dangerous when that much water, when that much water, has nowhere to go. And so those flash floods are incredibly powerful. They can be deadly to people. They're horrible destroyers of infrastructure. And also that force of water completely destroys our soil. It causes a lot of erosion, which further dries out our entire landscape. And that's the very last thing that we need to be doing right now. We need to be hydrating our landscape as much as we possibly can now, because our groundwater is kind of like our savings account. That water that's stored in the soil in our shallow aquifers and our deep aquifers, is much less at risk of evaporating and being lost. And so we basically, rain gardens help mimic natural systems a little bit, where instead of water flowing straight into a storm drain and into the river and just flowing downstream as quickly as possible, we can use some of that and divert it into a basin that has special soil and gravel and soil cover, and is planted with special usually native, but sometimes also other plants that can kind of survive being flooded and then being dried out for a period of time. But also a lot of those plants that we use help break down pollutants that come from the roads and things like that, these petrochemicals and whatnot. And so as the water is infiltrating, all of those kind of chemicals are not infiltrating as well, although some of them do. But it's still better to kind of harvest the water, and that at the same time provides a way that even in the desert we can grow native trees, provide native pollinator and wildlife habitat, and also reduce what I sort of mentioned earlier, which is urban heat island effect, which as our climate continues to warm, is going to be increasingly a problem, especially during more newer developed areas of the city that do not have a lot of green space. And they're also being developed in the kind of naturally hotter regions within the watershed. And so we're really trying to kind of get a jump on this problem by building rain gardens so that there will be trees, there will be green space, but that they are not going to require a lot of extra irrigation and care, because obviously, like, we're not going to have the water to do that. But the nice thing is that plants that are planted in rain gardens do usually have access to moist soil, even during pretty dry times of the year. So we're very excited about rain gardens as being an important part of our city and our watershed, but primarily our city's actions trying to become more resilient to climate change as it happens. And that kind of brings me to, as JR said, our newest initiative, which I am a little shell shocked, but also excited to be running, called the Santa Fe Community Network, where we really are going to be putting more emphasis on trying to plant trees, shrubs, and other kinds of vegetative cover throughout the city and the watershed, that are ecologically appropriate, of course, that can help kind of protect our soil from evaporation and from erosion, and also reduce the heat island effects and hold moisture in the soil and provide habitat and green space and all this kind of stuff. So Basically, the community network is going to be a partnership. Once again, it's a network. And the role of the Watershed Association will be kind of a bridging type of role. So we'll have our own planting projects, but then like today, we're partnering with the county and also the city water conservation office to put on this planting. And so we're excited to continue doing that and basically be able to support anybody who's doing planting projects within the watershed to make sure that they have the resources they need to be able to plant, as the city says, the right tree in the right place, to be able to ensure the highest chance of survival for whatever kind of vegetation is being planted. Because trees really are an important part, and shrubs in our in our watershed and in our kind of ecosystem biome. Trees and shrubs are a really important part of how we can both mitigate some of the causes of climate change as they keep happening, but also help make our landscapes more resilient to the effects of climate change. And so even though trees and water, of course, are related, it's not exactly we're not dealing exactly with river flows or things like that. But because we already have been playing this bridging role, this connecting collaborative role within the watershed, and because we do work in the city, in the county, with private, public, nonprofit organizations and individuals, we hope that will kind of give us the leverage to be able to provide support to whoever is wanting to plant trees. You can come to us and we can help get funding or supplies or provide guidance, or even help publicize what's going on, because it really is going to take everybody. We don't have an organization that is fully capable of tackling any single problem within our watershed. We all have to work on it together. So it should be exciting, and we're off to a great start. I think we've had over 60 volunteers show up today to help plant along the river, and will be watering. And so we'll have lots of opportunities if you are interested in getting involved with this kind of facet of the program, or you can come and walk near San Ysidro Park or Romero Park and see all of the new trees, shrubs, and wildflowers that we've planted. And you can also go to our website, and I'm doing little series of short videos that are kind of just summarizing some of the projects that we've been working on over the course of this spring, and a couple before that as well, and sort of where we hope to be moving throughout the summer and into the next few years. We'll definitely be collaborating with, as I said, the city and the county. The city just launched their Tree Smart Santa Fe program, which we are a part of. So it's a little confusing, but if you are confused, just know that it can be the same thing. If you live in the city, it's the same thing. If you live in the county, we'll probably be, we can figure it out, and we're all working together, which I feel really encouraged and refreshed about. So I think I will just put in a small plug, which is that our kind of official launch event for the community network is this coming Thursday, the 29th at 5:30 p.m. We'll be doing a Zoom conversation where I'll be summarizing very shortly the program again, and then we'll get to hear from Laura McCarthy, who is our state forester, and she'll talk about kind of the importance of urban forests and the relationship between water and forests, even in our very arid ecosystem. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I will invite you all. It's free, so you can get the Zoom link on our website. And also we have a tree giveaway raffle that we'll be announcing at the end of that talk. So the tickets are $10, and you'll be getting the winners will get a 5-gallon tree plus professional like installation and consultation from our partner arborist. So it's a pretty good, pretty good deal. And yeah, so if you live anywhere in the watershed and you want to possibly get a free or get a tree and installation for $10, you can also do that on our website. And also just if you have other ideas or thoughts of how we can make this network better, we're kind of doing things a little bit backwards, where we're launching first and kind of figuring out the details afterwards. But the good thing about that is that we will have some momentum and kind of confirm that this is a real thing that's worth spending some time on. So our intention is to have some more kind of community listening and collaboration sessions over the summer, and we'll be doing tree sprints and things like that kind of in fall and spring when the best planting times are. So definitely I can write my email in the chat, or you all probably have it, but if you have questions after today, feel free to reach out. And yeah, I think, we're just in our beginning phases. And I think just like everybody else, this is such a great, as horrible as COVID has been and continues to be in so many ways, we're really trying to take advantage of this time to really reorganize and move in new directions and to grow and to kind of modernize and think about old things in new ways. So I think I will kind of leave it there. And if you have questions, if you want to get involved, either donating or volunteering or spreading the word, or just like appreciating living here and feeling connected to the land or conserving water in some way, we appreciate it all. So thank you so much. And thanks again for having me today.
Thank you so much. That's a lot of good information. Thank you. Do you have time for a question or two before you go, or do you need to get back to it?
Yeah.
So we had a question in chat here. It's a bit of a big one. I'm not sure if you have the answer, but how many watersheds are in the world and how many are in New Mexico?
I
quiz. Yeah.
I think that's probably an answer that Google can solve for you. I will say that, as straightforward as the concept of watershed is, it can also be a little bit philosophical, because, like I said, watersheds are nested. So kind of we have official watersheds where, like the Santa Fe River is an official watershed, or the Rio Grande watershed, or the Mississippi watershed, or things like that. But a watershed can even be, on your own property, or a watershed can be around an arroyo. It's any area of land where the surface runoff is all going to flow to one place. So your sink is a watershed. So not in the scientific sense, but in terms of a definition. So yeah, I guess you could, depending on how you want to define your watershed, or kind of the scale, the minimum scale that you want to think about, that'll dictate how many watersheds there are. But a good way to think of it is how many rivers are there in the world, and that will give you the answer for how many watersheds are there approximately. And the same will go for New Mexico.
Hey, thank you. So quite a bit, it sounds like. And it's
yeah,
complicated. All right. We have another question here. Is the rain garden program part of the community tree network, or are those kind of two separate programs?
That's a great question. I think that the rain garden program came first, but now we're kind of putting it into the community tree program because rain gardens have trees in them. So, so there we have it.
Okay, all right. And then I was a little bit curious. So you have those 4 pillars, and I know maybe well, I'm not sure. I know you said it's complicated to keep them all separate. I was really curious because each of those pillars is really a very different thing, a totally different type of work from the others. How do you prioritize and balance between them? How do you decide we really need to do most of our work in stewardship and a little bit in advocacy, or how does that process work? If it might not be easy to answer.
I think my impression so far is that it's kind of an organic process mostly. And yeah, but again, I think they're very related. So yeah, stewardship is very educational, or stewardship can also be about restoration, or, you know, getting people to become more aware of the issues within our watershed is definitely an important foundation to a lot of advocacy work as well. But also, you know, especially with advocacy as an example, but I think this is true for any of those pillars, is it kind of depends on what's happening in the watershed at the time and what seems very pressing. So like, you know, if water quality is a really big issue at the time, or if, you know, if there's some policy that is being considered, you know, maybe we need to spend more time on advocacy or that sort of thing. Or like right now, where we're kind of a year behind on picking up trash and getting our waterways cleaned, like we're really trying to get more volunteers out to clean up trash. And that's always like an urgent issue. So things like that. I think, yeah, we're kind of caught on the hamster wheel a little bit of, you know, what is this pressing urgent thing that we need to focus on most right now, and then try to kind of shore it up with the other programs. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like sort of like everything in the watershed, it's all interconnected, and the priorities kind of shift over time. Neat.
Sure is.
Well, thank you so much, Mori. I really appreciate that. We have your email posted in chat. And then if there's any other information you want people to take away, please go ahead and throw that in the chat as well.